There is a play in this World Cup that America will keep talking about long after the trophy gets handed out, and it has nothing to do with the final score. Julian Alvarez scored a goal in extra time that people are already calling one of the best strikes of the entire tournament. Lautaro Martinez added a second right after. Argentina walked away with a 3-1 win over Switzerland and a spot in the semifinal against England. But almost nobody is talking about the football. Everybody is talking about the 72nd minute in Kansas City when a Swiss forward hit the ground, a referee reached for his pocket, and the whole tournament suddenly felt rigged to millions of people watching at home. Here is what actually happened on the field. Switzerland had just tied the game 1 all through a composed finish from Dan Ndoye, and for about 10 minutes they looked like the better team. Breel Embolo drove into the Argentine penalty area. Leandro Paredes stepped across to challenge him. Embolo went down. The referee, a Portuguese official named João Pedro Pinheiro, pulled out a yellow card for Paredes almost instantly, the way referees do when the picture in front of them looks obvious. Then the video review room stepped in and the picture changed completely. The replay showed frame by frame that Paredes never made contact. Not a graze, not a clip, nothing. Embolo was already falling before the challenge arrived. Pinheiro walked over to the sideline monitor, watched it for himself, canceled the yellow card he had just given to Paredes, and instead booked Embolo for simulation. Because Embolo had already picked up a yellow card earlier in the first half for a late tackle, that second caution became an automatic red card. He left the field in tears, comforted by his own teammates, while Argentina finished the match with a man advantage and eventually won it in extra time. To be clear about the facts first, because this part is not really in dispute, pretty much every major broadcaster and stats outlet that reviewed the footage agreed with the referee. Former USA goalkeeper Brad Friedel, calling the match, said flatly that a lot of people beyond just the Swiss Federation would be upset about a call like that landing in a game of this size. Former Manchester City forward Bradley Wright Phillips put it even more bluntly, saying he felt for Embolo's teammates, but not for Embolo himself, because Embolo may have cost his own team a place in the Final Four. Even neutral fans slowing down the replay on social media mostly landed in the same place. This was simulation, plain and simple. And historically, that makes this an enormous moment. Embolo became only the 4th player in more than 60 years of World Cup history to be sent off with a second yellow card, specifically for diving, joining Francesco Totti of Italy in 2002, Luis Perez of Mexico in 2006, and Ghana's Asamoah Gyan, also in 2006. 20 years had passed without a single referee at a World Cup applying that exact rule in a big moment. Pinheiro did it on the biggest stage there is, with the whole planet watching, and by the letter of the law, he got it right. So why does a technically correct decision feel, to a huge chunk of the football world right now, like part of something much bigger and much darker? Because this was not an isolated call. It was the 6th major video review moment in Argentina's tournament alone, and almost every single one of those 6 moments swung in the same direction. Go back to the group stage against Algeria when Lionel Messi's studs raked down an opponent's leg from knee to ankle, and the review room decided it did not even merit a card. Move forward to the knockout rounds, where 2 separate penalty appeals against Argentine defenders were waved off after lengthy stoppages that left broadcasters visibly confused about the standard being applied. Now add Kansas City, where the review system took a yellow card away from an Argentine player and handed a red card to his opponent instead. Individually, defenders of each decision have a case. Stacked together across one tournament involving one team, the pattern is exactly what has been driving 3 straight weeks of controversy across every major football broadcast in the country. And this tournament has a political backdrop that makes every one of those decisions land differently than it would have 4 years ago in Qatar. This is the first World Cup ever hosted primarily inside the United States during a second Trump administration, and the closeness between the American president and FIFA's president, Gianni Infantino, has become impossible to separate from the officiating conversation. The two men have been friends since 2018 when Infantino, then 2 years into his job, showed up at the White House to celebrate the joint United States, Mexico, and Canada bid winning the tournament. Infantino gave Trump a personalized jersey and a signed match ball that day, and by most accounts, that gesture stuck. When Trump faced his first impeachment trial and his approval numbers were at their lowest, Infantino spoke publicly in supportive terms, and Trump has apparently never forgotten it. Since then, the two men have exchanged calls and messages regularly. They have played golf together, and Infantino was brought along on Trump's very first state trip abroad during his second term, treated almost like a member of the administration rather than the head of an independent sporting body. That relationship became a live news story just days before the Embolo and Paredes moment when the United States national team's own controversy broke open. Folarin Balogun, the leading American scorer at this World Cup, had picked up a one-match suspension, then seemingly out of nowhere, FIFA reversed it, clearing him to play in the very next match against Belgium. Reporting out of Spain and confirmed by multiple outlets traced the reversal directly back to a phone call Trump made to Infantino personally, asking for the suspension to be looked at again. Trump did not deny it. FIFA's decision to reverse a disciplinary ruling for the tournament's co-host on the personal request of a sitting American president who happens to be one of Infantino's closest friends set off exactly the kind of legitimacy questions that are now attaching themselves to every close call involving Argentina as well, even though nobody has produced a similar direct link in that specific case. It matters here that Argentina is not just any team at this World Cup. Lionel Messi, at 39 years old, is playing what almost everyone assumes is the final World Cup of his career, chasing a second consecutive title with the defending champions. FIFA has enormous commercial incentive to see the sport's biggest global star and the reigning champion nation go as deep into the bracket as possible in front of American television audiences that are still being converted into soccer fans. None of that proves a single decision was manipulated. Video review technology has been shown repeatedly and independently to get contact calls, like the Embolo and Paredes moment, correct at an extremely high rate. But it does explain why so many neutral observers are no longer willing to evaluate each individual VAR call purely on its own technical merits, and why phrases like sports washing and legitimacy crisis have been used by major outlets covering this specific tournament, not just by angry fans on social media. Switzerland's federation has stopped short of directly accusing FIFA of favoritism, but Swiss football writers and several players have pointedly noted that this is now the second time in this tournament that a card has been transferred from one player to another using the same review protocol, both times benefiting the same nation. Longtime referees, including former Premier League official Mark Clattenburg, working as a broadcast analyst, called the underlying legal reasoning sound while separately describing the outcome for Embolo as harsh, given that the rule was designed for blatant, cynical dives rather than a split-second fall during a fast-moving challenge inside the penalty area. What happens next matters just as much as what already happened. Argentina now moves on to face England in the semifinal, a fixture that already carries decades of political and sporting weight, completely independent of anything involving VAR. Fans on both sides are bracing for another round of the same argument the moment any contact decision goes to review, because the pattern established over these 3 weeks means nobody is starting from a neutral place anymore. FIFA has publicly defended every one of the 6 major calls involving Argentina as individually correct under the current laws, and reviewing officials have said the same. Independent broadcasters largely agree with them on the letter of the law. What FIFA has not addressed, and what continues to fuel the story heading into the final week of this tournament, is the deeper question of whether an organization this closely tied to the host nation's political leadership can credibly police the appearance of bias, even when every single call turns out to be technically defensible. For Breel Embolo personally, the moment is almost purely tragic, regardless of where anyone lands on the fairness debate. He is 30 years old, playing in what is very likely his final World Cup, and the tournament ended for him and his country on a play that will be replayed in highlight reels for years. Not because of anything glorious, but because of a split-second decision that will follow him for the rest of his career. Teammates consoled him on the sideline as he walked off in tears, and Swiss captain Granit Xhaka has already said publicly that the changing room does not blame him individually, even as the broader argument about the tournament rages on without him. Argentina, for its part, has shown no interest in engaging with the controversy at all. Messi has not commented directly on the officiating pattern, choosing instead to focus every post-game answer on the semifinal ahead against England. Coach Lionel Scaloni has repeatedly said his team simply plays the whistle and cannot control what the review room decides, a version of the same answer coaches have given at every World Cup since video review was introduced. That answer will not satisfy critics who believe the pattern speaks for itself, but it also will not change what happens on the field in the coming days. Where Argentina now stands 2 wins away from defending the title they won 4 years ago in Qatar, at a tournament that America will remember for its politics almost as much as for its football. The visa saga that preceded all of this deserves its own mention because it set the tone for how closely intertwined politics and officiating have become at this tournament. Months before a single ball was kicked, reporting out of major American and European outlets detailed how journalists covering the tournament, and in at least one case a match official himself, were denied entry visas to the United States, even as FIFA's president stayed publicly silent on the issue. Critics argued that Infantino's unwillingness to challenge the American government on something as basic as press access for a global sporting event previewed exactly the kind of deference that would later show up in disciplinary and refereeing decisions once the tournament actually began. FIFA has never formally responded to those specific criticisms beyond general statements about respecting host nation sovereignty over immigration matters. There is also the matter of money, which rarely gets left out of any conversation involving Infantino for long. Financial disclosures reported by American business outlets this month revealed that Trump received roughly $15,000 worth of World Cup tickets as gifts tied to Infantino and FIFA. At the same time, European lawmakers were pressing questions about the awarding of FIFA's inaugural Peace Prize to Trump back in December of last year. That prize, created seemingly out of nowhere just months before the tournament opened, drew immediate comparisons to Trump's unsuccessful campaign for the actual Nobel Peace Prize, which went instead to a Venezuelan opposition figure. Detractors have characterized the entire award as a piece of theater designed purely to flatter a head of state whose country happens to be hosting the vast majority of this tournament's matches, 78 of them according to FIFA's own official count, compared to a much smaller share split between Mexico and Canada. None of this on its own proves that a single offside call, penalty decision, or red card at this World Cup was decided with a political thumb on the scale. Referees, video officials, and independent broadcast analysts have walked through the Embolo and Paredes replay dozens of times by now, from a dozen different camera angles, and the verdict keeps coming back the same way. No contact, a dive, and a legally correct red card under the current laws of the game. That has not stopped the moment from becoming a lightning rod because it landed at the exact intersection of a real officiating pattern favoring one team and a real, well-documented, and unusually close relationship between football's top administrator and the president of the country hosting the tournament. Swiss media have been especially pointed in connecting the dots. Several commentators back in Zurich and Geneva noted that this marks the second time in this exact tournament that the so-called mistaken identity protocol has been used to move a card from one player to another, and that both times the protocol worked out in Argentina's favor. FIFA's own explanation is straightforward. The protocol exists precisely for situations like this one, where the review room determines that the wrong player was booked, and applying it consistently regardless of which team benefits is the entire point of having the rule in the first place. Swiss Federation officials, while stopping well short of alleging outright bias, have privately pushed FIFA for more transparency about how review decisions get triaged and prioritized in real time during matches, according to reporting from within the tournament's press corps. Younger American fans discovering the sport for the first time through this tournament are seeing a version of soccer that veteran European supporters know all too well. Video review technology that is almost always correct on the individual play and almost always controversial anyway, because sports fandom has never really been about pure accuracy. It has always been about narrative, and right now the narrative writing itself in real time is one where the defending champion, led by the biggest star the sport has ever produced, keeps getting the benefit of the doubt at a tournament being run by a man who golfs with the American president. Whether that narrative survives contact with the semifinals, where Argentina now faces an England side with its own massive following and its own history of feeling hard done by at major tournaments, will say a lot about whether this becomes a permanent asterisk on the 2026 World Cup or just another controversy that fades once a new one takes its place. For now, the only certainty is the one written on the scoreboard in Kansas City. Switzerland's tournament ended at 3-1 in extra time with 10 men on the field for the final half hour and with one of their best forwards walking off in tears over a decision that was almost certainly correct and almost certainly going to be argued about for a very long time regardless. There is a broader debate now happening among television analysts about whether video review as a technology was ever supposed to carry this much weight in the public imagination. When the system was introduced years ago, the entire pitch to fans was that it would remove controversy from the sport by replacing gut reactions with camera angles and slow-motion certainty. What has actually happened, at least at this tournament, is closer to the opposite. Every big moment now comes wrapped in a review. Every review takes several minutes, and every minute of silence in a packed stadium gives conspiracy theories time to grow before the decision even gets announced. By the time Pinheiro walked back from the monitor in Kansas City, phones across the stadium were already filming reactions, and clips of Embolo's fall, slowed down frame by frame, were circulating online before the match had even restarted. That speed is part of the story, too. Analysis accounts dedicated purely to breaking down officiating decisions in near real time have become some of the most followed football accounts in the country this summer, a shift that barely existed at the last World Cup in Qatar. Within minutes of the Embolo decision, freeze-frame breakdowns were being shared showing the exact gap between Paredes' leg and Embolo's body, timed down to fractions of a second. That immediacy cuts both ways. It has made it much harder for governing bodies to control the narrative around a controversial call, but it has also made it much easier to actually prove beyond reasonable doubt when a referee got something right or wrong. In this specific case, the flood of independent frame-by-frame analysis mostly worked in the referee's favor, confirming what Pinheiro had already concluded on the field. Still, the American audience watching all of this unfold for the first time at scale is getting an unusually intense introduction to a sport where the technology meant to settle arguments has instead become the argument itself. Longtime European football writers covering the tournament for American outlets have noted, half joking and half serious, that this is simply what soccer has always been like, and that the newest fans are just catching up to a debate the rest of the world has been having since goal line technology first arrived over a decade ago. Where this tournament differs, though, is the specific overlay of presidential politics. A co-host nation's own team benefiting from a reverse suspension and a defending champion nation benefiting from a string of contact decisions, all compressed into the same 3-week window and all funneled through the same increasingly scrutinized relationship between one president and one football administrator. Whatever happens in the semifinal against England and whatever happens in the final after that, this specific quarterfinal in Kansas City has already secured its place in World Cup history for reasons that have almost nothing to do with the eventual champion. It will be remembered as the night a Swiss forward's tears became a symbol for an argument much bigger than himself, an argument about who football's biggest tournament is really being run for, and whether a century-old sport built on human judgment can survive an era where every single decision gets filmed, slowed down, and picked apart by millions of people within seconds of it happening.